Hello and welcome to Champions Reviews. I am Dan, here with my co-host Joe.
Hello there! And I know I just cracked a few windows there. We just got finishing up with watching the opening to the greatest superhero animated series of all times, Spider-Man 1994 from the 90s.
Indeed,
I love this episode.
it was a good intro.
They always start with the lizard,
Yeah, it is.
except with that really crappy rainy movie with Green Goblin first. But what?
The lizard's a good jump-off point.
Yeah. Now, the beauty of this series is it was not writing down for children. They understood that you don't write as though children are stupid in that time. Nowadays, we have a lot of adults who seem to act more infantile than children do. And the beauty of this show is the animation, like both 2D and 3D, is slicker than anything you see today. Oh my gosh, I love the art style. My problem a bit with the Bruce Timm art style is, now don't flame me, I love the Bruce Timm cartoon shows. The art style is not very good. The jaw is too weird and angular for the men, and all the women have the same design.
It's very uniform.
Now that said, the writing in those series are typically really good, especially Superman, and Justice League is really good. Batman, there are good points and bad points, but Spider-Man, each character looks different. I know they used some general uniform designs, but you look at MJ's design, it's very different from Felicia. Felicia's design is pretty different from I think it's uh, Terry Lee. And actually, Terry Lee's a character I really like. He's just cartoon, but should have gone to the comics,
Oh, yeah.
especially Blade comics. But the thing is, the cartoon is way better than the 1962 to 1987 comic book era of Spider-Man. I do like Spider-Man. I'm just saying the cartoon does everything better than most comics. This cartoon is the real MCU, the real one.
One thing that actually enjoyed this episode is that it introduced one plot point that is used throughout the entire series.
Huh?
The Recombinator.
Yeah, the Recombinator should have made its way into the comics, but never did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a neo subatomic. It's a device that reorganizes your subatomic cells and reorganizes them, but it can deconstruct them, as it does a few times, which is horrifying when it kills people, and it can fix you. It was made as a cure for cancer and to help facilitate putting certain healing aspects of lizard DNA into humans. The problem is Connors tested on himself and thus created a lizard. It's the best possible explanation for the lizard, but the problem is the series. Now, for one thing, Lizard doesn't really show up much. Although I love how he shows up in the last season, but we're not judging the last season. We're just reviewing one episode.
Yeah.
But this, like the art style and animation is great. Now for characterization. Now I'm going to start with Eddie Brock real quick because there's that new Venom movie that came out. That was terrible. They clearly didn't understand Eddie Brock. Now I know there are going to be some who are going to say, well, Venom got to be an anti-hero. No. Venom's a villain. Venom is evil. The symbiote draws out your worst possible traits, or at least the Venom does.
Not to
The
mention
Venom symbiote.
the cannibalism.
Yeah. And there's going to be someone who says, well, no, he doesn't really eat people. How often in the comics, especially in the 90s, can you say, I'm going to eat you? And he says that to Ben Reilly when he fights against Ben Reilly. And that, I remember when I first read that, I went, I read it as a teenager and I went, oh my gosh, this guy's evil. This guy is nuts. But, yeah. Now, Eddie Brock should be a villain. I refuse to...
Yeah.
Like, he should never be cast in a heroic light. Now, this series did put him into a semi-heroic light for 5 minutes in order to kill him off. That was well done. but I kind of feel like the comics typically got the tone better with him to make him the villain. Peter Parker, I'll actually say that Peter Parker in here there are differences. Peter Parker in the comics has a much fiercer temper.
Oh, yes. People don't remember it.
But his temper from the 62 to 97 period was infamous. There's a reason his nickname is Tiger.
Eventually, something that a lot of people don't realize or have forgotten is that there was a time where Peter was the bigger bully between him and Flash.
Yep,
I would intellectually talk down to Flash.
Yeah, and that lasted for like 20 comics or so. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while after. But typically they were best buddies.
Yes.
And that's one of the few flaws in the series. When Flash is introduced, they don't really touch on the bromance. And it's one of the best parts of Spider-Man. But I have to admit, this series is the best superhero series ever. But there are some details that could have been done better. And they're not glaring yet, but they will be.
We're going to discuss those when the episodes come out.
Yeah. Now, we'll discuss the plot in a minute, but the characters. Peter Parker's temper is not as noticeable, but here's the thing. He does have a few optimistic moments and optimistic jokes. Peter Parker doesn't typically crack those. But he started cracking them when he became Scarlet Spider, which I would argue was the best point in Peter's story, because I like that he suddenly was jerked out of his typical manic depressant attitude. And yes, I think he does suffer from that.
Yeah.
But because he's married to a millionaire actress and model and whatnot. But the thing is, Peter, I think, does have some mental health problems. But I don't say that from a point of hatred. I say that out of love. But the thing is, this Peter, I don't think he has some of that. I know there's PTSD that Peter developed. This Peter does not have it yet fully. Well, he kind of does with the Ben Parker thing. Peter does as well, but it's not as it's different. It's noticeable in a different way. I find the cartoon Peter is much more optimistic, much funnier, and I'm actually going to reveal something that it's going to have Linkara, Richard Meyer, just some guy, and these people really after us. This is more reminiscent of Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly is the optimistic Spider-Man. He's the bigger badass between him and Peter.
And he has the better roasts.
Yeah. And the thing with Ben was he was always a more dynamic character. Because Peter is reactionary towards the plot and towards, well, the main character, which is MJ. Whereas when Ben came in, he was the main character. And he's more proactive. And now Ben's the better character. That's a fact. But I'm going to say this. I really love Peter. He's my fourth favorite Spider-Man character of all times. Right behind Silver Sable, MJ, and Ben, in that order. Rising. Ben's the best, then it's MJ, then Silver, then it's Peter, in my opinion. But although Silver's better in the comics than the cartoon. Although in the cartoon, they chose the perfect voice actress. She's hot.
And it's the most accurate form.
Yeah.
Cartoon version of Silver.
Except for the whole working for someone without knowing his identity.
Yeah, true.
Now, that said, our little rants here and there, Peter in here is much more reminiscent of Ben Reilly in the comics, the best Spider-Man, and the original Peter Parker. Yes, I went there. But, now, if you disagree with us, leave it in the comments. We'll understand. That said, Peter in this series is dynamic, and his voice actor is the best Spider-Man voice actor of all times. The only Spider-Man actor in my book. He's the definitive Spider-Man actor. Yeah. His name is Christopher Daniel Barnes. Lucky Barnes. Yeah, nice. But Chris Barnes is one of my favorite voice actors of all times. He is perfect as Peter. He nails the whininess of Spider-Man. Actually, I'll say Spider-Man. He nails the whininess, nails the optimism of Ben Reilly, who... Now, Ben did have times when he wasn't entirely optimistic, but Ben's the one who would be more likely to go. Now, Peter would probably rage at the enemy, like, "Oh, I can't believe you brought me down to the sewers." Then, "Oh, why am I always in the sewers?" And you know what? You don't see the Avengers doing this. You don't see the Defenders. You don't see the Hulk. Well, maybe the Hulk. You don't see, he'll just rant to himself. Peter eventually lost that trait, But the thing is, this Peter is almost an amalgamation.
I think the modern perception of that Peter Parker is based off of this cartoon because
I would argue no. I think it's more the Sam Raimi movies.
okay, there before the Sam Raimi movies, a lot of people
This was their intro to Spidey.
exactly
This was my intro at about 3 years old.
so their mentality between the quipping and whining is probably more akin to this Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, in that regard, yes. Now the problem is with the post Raimi movie Spider-Man is he's a loser, and he sucks. But Peter Parker has sucked ever since '97.
Yeah.
And in its totality, like the only decent storyline that even thought to introduce a temper to the character was Sin's Past. But we're not going to talk about Straczynski or his run. But anyways, this cartoon has great audio, has a great characterization. Aunt May is the usual weak-willed old lady, which she was in the comics, and up until '97. Now, Aunt May, I do like. I just remember a time when she wasn't Mary Sued. I'm just saying. But then you get, in this episode, Connors and his family are really interesting. I like that they make Billy a kid who's really terrified because his dad became a monster. Jonah is hilarious. I love his clips.
Of course, it's Jonah. I mean, there's only one Jonah that's better than this Jonah.
Richard Simmons.
Yeah. Wait, you serious?
Yeah. Oh, man, Simmons. Now, I don't like the Raimi movies, but Richard Simmons, all his scenes are the best. He steals the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think they should have just made a J. Jonah Jameson movie after the first Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, that would have been entertaining.
Yeah, I actually would have watched that.
Oh, how many people would have watched it? He should have been the MCU.
Yeah. But maybe that's why the MCU sucks, is because, well, Simmons. I know, a lot of people are going to go, you don't like this. Is there anything in Marvel you like? It's just, a lot of their products are hit or miss. Now, but that said, this is the real MCU. This show is near perfect.
Mm-hmm.
The characterization is, like, I can't even describe it. It's just so perfect. I love Robbie in the show. Robbie's just perfect. The voice actor is so darn good.
You could tell that it was a black man voicing it. You could see he's an African American.
Yeah, and honestly, oh my gosh. I wish they brought in Luke Cage into this series.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that's the only... Like, honestly, I wish Luke Cage was in it. And then in the last arc, you know what I mean? The Secret Wars, Luke would have been around. Because one thing I do like from the comics, and I don't like post-97 comics, but I do appreciate this a little, is the bromance between Luke and Spidey. And as someone who's read both comics and some of the crossovers are frequently some of the best stories for both. And yeah, I never was a fan of Luke's yellow shirt days, but
Moon Tiara Magic.
But Luke Cage, I wish he was in here.
Yeah,
I think that honestly, if they had made a Power Man cartoon back then, I would have watched the stuffing out of it. I didn't like any of the other cartoons except maybe X-Men, but I think Luke Cage. You get these writers or the X-Men writers on it, they would have done a perfect job.
Yeah.
Oh, and Iron Man was pretty good. I mean, on the Marvel side. Now, on the DC side, they were kicking Marvel's rear, except for Spider-Man was better than everything DC put out. But now, plot.
We also have one character I'd like to discuss, Deborah Whitman.
Oh yeah, in the comics, they made her schizophrenic. That was stupid.
Because she was an optimistic person who said, maybe there's good in Spider-Man. And they made her schizophrenic.
The reason they also did that was, oh man, you know what, changing writers, I don't like this as a love interest, I'll make her schizo. Or something. I think that was the case. And it's just like, why? You could have written her out of the series respectfully. This series, I love how Peter responds to her when he first hears her. Because she's a bit more of a cocky jerk in here, and I like it. But the thing is, I like how she says, how Peter thinks about her. Deborah Whitman, the little sister I never had or wanted. And he says that so irritably. But then you see the two talk with each other, and after he saves her, she was like, wow, you were pretty brave there. she really makes me think of a little sister. And I like that kind of bromance between the two. They immediately established a relationship as not romantic and platonic. And I love that. That was great. You know what? You can have friendships between the genders or like and whatnot. It's just, I love it. And here's the thing. The writing for female characters in the series is not usually very good. But Connors' wife, I always forget her name. Mary, I think it is. Mary, that's it. Mary and Deborah have some of the best writing in this show. Now, Aunt May is supposed to be fairly gentle and a bit of a wallflower. Deborah is kind of supposed to be between like Aunt May and comic book MJ, somewhere in the middle there. I'm just saying.
Yes.
And this show nails it. Mary is. I love Connors' wife in this episode. She's great. It's well portrayed.
It's a little funny because a lot of the characters mishandled in this series were very well handled in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
But those mishandled in the comics...
better handled in the cartoon. Yeah, it's a weird thing. But as to the plot of this episode, typical Night of the Lizard plot. Like, Spider-Man finds out Connors has turned himself accidentally into a lizard after running with the lizard, and has to stop him from turning Martha and the rest of the city into giant lizards.
Mm-hmm. Most first episode or issues Spider-Man series, they either use the lizard or Electro.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
This series doesn't go Electro until season 2 finale or season 3. Mm-hmm. And this series handles Electro really well. They make him more evil than he is in the comics. Because in the comics, I kind of feel like he's a misunderstood guy, and he wasn't so bad. Mm-hmm. And I know he's bisexual, and he's just a guy who just wants to make a clean break from villainy, but I'm going to say this, after 97, it feels like Spider-Man really picks on him, and Spider-Man's the villain. And I really feel bad for him.
It has to do with the consistency with the character. And
especially when you have a bad editor like Quesada and a terrible writer like Straczynski.
I mean, look at what happened with Sandman.
Yeah, Sandman was turned into a villain under Quesada, I think. And that was terrible. When Sandman is one of the coolest, most heroic guys around.
Mm-hmm. And because when they tried to turn him back into a villain where he infiltrated the heroes,
that was stupid.
And the fan rage that happened in there, they had to rewrite the story.
Of course, because here's the thing. Sandman is one of the coolest heroes. I love the Wild Pack.
And the touch of Sandman in the one Raimi movie was actually pretty nice.
Yeah, okay. I don't like Spider-Man 3, but the Sandman, not him killing Uncle Ben, but just him having a daughter and doing everything to cure her of cancer and striving for her. I love that story, and I found that I really felt for him. I wish the actor was perfect too. I wish he got his own movie so that we could see the conclusion to the story between him and his daughter. And like, oh man, was it perfect. That's something that should have made its way into the comic.
Yeah, and I think it made its way in the comic very, very short term and then
just forgotten. But anyways, let's finally rate this episode. I would rate it a 2.
2.5.
Okay. Why 2.5?
There was nothing wrong with the episode.
So above average.
Above average. It was enjoyable, a good start.
Now,
we have a solid story.
And solid dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And animation and art. Yeah, only reason I put it as a 2 is because a standard of the series, for this series, this is a 2. Almost a 1.75 star, because this series gets such good episodes. But if you were to compare it to almost every other cartoon out there, it's a 4. So I'm kind of holding this show up to a higher...
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of being harsher on this series.
I'm looking at this episode alone.
Yeah. Well, me too, but I guess I'm not. But I'm trying to be...
That's fine.
I'm trying to be harsher with this series because it's pretty much my favorite.
Yes.
I'm trying to be objective, which is hard for me with this series. It's so good.
we're reviewing stuff. Of course, we're going to have certain biases.
Yeah, like Roger Ebert with crime fiction. I never understood his obsession with it. I love film noir, but I disagreed with a lot of his favorite crime movies and some of his least favorites. But outside of that genre, he was perfect as a reviewer and as a critic. Anyways, if you like this video, like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. And web swing over and hit that notification bell.